Yes, hello to you once again. Welcome back to your number one and hopefully your favourite classic dirt bike TV channel, where we do our very best to try and uncover more of those old school vintage dirt bikes from way back in the day, when of course at that time our particular sport was called scrambling, and not the modern interpretation, which of course is now called motocross. So what's coming up in the coming weeks and months here on CDB TV? Well, currently we're just waiting on the nod to head to the south of the country again, where we're going to film another nice collection of vintage off-roaders, and as soon as I get details of the bikes we're going to feature, we'll let you know here on CDB TV. So if you've not already subscribed to my channel, then now would be a very good time to do that, because that particular collection promises to be very comprehensive. So coming up next, we're going to take a look at a bike that was launched in the early 1980s. Not of course a fully blown off-road motocross machine, but nevertheless quite a good bike for its time. So we're going to dive straight into that video now and take a look at this 1982 DR500 Suzuki Fourstroke. Now, the 1982 DR500 Suzuki Fourstroker was basically Suzuki's answer to Honda's very successful XR500, and also Yamaha's TT500 and Kawasaki's KLX Fourstrokers, because in the early 1980s, sales of these kind of big bore single cylinder off-road bikes were certainly on the up, and were increasing in popularity as a good alternative to the many two-stroke race bikes that were currently available. Now, as you're aware, these DR500s were more or less manufactured to be used as enduro or trail bikes, because they did come with a full lighting kit and all of the other parts required to allow it to be used on the highway, although, and as in many cases with the owners who bought these bikes back in the day, if they then decided not to use them on the road, they would then simply remove all of those road-going parts that weren't required, and then use them as fully blown motocross machines, as of course we have in our particular case here. Now, at the time I grabbed these video clips and the pictures of this bike, the bike's owner Jim Colligan had just recently bought this machine to use as a second or backup bike to his 1981 490 Micro, and apparently the previous owner of this machine thought that the bike was just a bit too tall for his shorter stature, so he then sold the bike on to Jim, who fortunately had much longer legs. But as you can see, our particular DR500 isn't a fully original bike, because it does have a few non-stock original parts bolted onto it, but apart from maybe different forks on the front and replacement rear shocks, exhaust and handlebars and controls, it's still quite a good example of one of these extremely reliable four-banger Suzukis. And so, as we begin with a look at the DR500's chassis for 1982, which was a simple mild steel frame that used a large diameter tube for its backbone underneath the tank, and a similar large down tube here at the front, which then split into two smaller tubes that then joined together at the lower part of the motor. And naturally it was all painted in this Suzuki blue livery, which of course was the correct frame colour for this bike back in that year. But these footrests that we see here are upgrades to the original skinny items that Suzuki would have fixed to this chassis in that year, but these will certainly offer much more support to the rider's feet when he's standing up on those pegs. And so as we get to the DR's motor, which was a single cylinder air-cooled four-stroke power plant that had a single overhead camshaft and a 4-valve cylinder head. Now, as I remember, I think the motor's bore was about 88mm and its stroke was about 82mm, and basically this was just a beefed up DR500 engine, where Suzuki actually left the bore much the same as the 400, but then fitted a much longer conrod and increased the stroke of the engine from, I think, what was 65.2mm to 82mm to then make it into a full-blown 500. Now, the engine also had Suzuki's TSCC system, or twin swirl combustion chamber, which was basically a posh title for its combustion process, which reputedly gave the engine much better power and throttle response. And again, the 500 DR engine was also fitted with 2 counterbalancer shafts to try and help ease out any vibrations from the motor, and by all accounts they did their job very well, as this was quite a smooth running motor when it was in operation. The original clutch on this engine was the same one used from the older DR400, but this was naturally now beefed up just to try and help cope with the increase in power, and things like access to the engine's oil filter was quite easily accessible by simply removing these 3 screws on this side cover and then pulling out the old filter and replacing it with a brand new one. Now, the gearbox was a 5-speeder, as I recall, which, as you'd expect, wasn't exactly geared for short sprints on a scrambles track because of its road and trail origins, but on long straights and wide open racetracks, it did have a slight advantage on some of the short shifting thoroughbred motocross bikes of its day. And again, I'm pretty sure that this isn't the original exhaust system for this DR500. It certainly has the look of a pipe that's been custom made specifically for this bike, but nevertheless it still looks like a very good bit of kit in stainless steel, and it looks like another of those straight through big bore pipes that you often find on these large 4-banger engines. And once more, the tailpipe is another quality item made of good quality stainless steel, once again with no muffler, of course, just a straight through pipe. And if you hang around until the end of the video, you'll even get the chance to hear the sound from this DR motor and tailpipe when we fire up the machine. But to fuel our big thirsty 500 DR, we've got a McCuney carburetor to supply the air-fuel mixture, and I'm pretty sure that back in 1982 it would have been a 35mm McCuney that would have been fitted to this motor in that year, and this carb would have drawn its air through a foam filter that was fitted inside the airbox, which was accessed from underneath the bike's seat. Although in terms of a big single-cylinder 4-stroke power plant, these DR500s weren't exactly the most powerful engines fitted to an off-road bike, and as I recall, I'm pretty sure in stock trim They only knocked out around the 27 horsepower mark, but despite that, they were still great at what they did, and that was supplying loads of grunt and torque. And as long as they were looked after and serviced regularly, these engines were extremely reliable and almost unbreakable. But having said that, they were never ever meant to be used as all-out motocross race bikes, although if you did want to put them up against custom-made motocross machines, then these 500 motors would maybe not put you on the top step of the podium, but they could certainly take some abuse on the racetrack, and usually they would never ever let you down when the going got tough. And they certainly had that reputation of toughness and reliability. Now, by now, you've probably more than likely already sussed out that the front forks on our DR Suzuki aren't the standard 1982 suspension units that were bolted on at the factory, and in that year it would have been a set of Kayaba forks that would have been fitted to this bike, although the original stock Kayabas were always seen as far too soft and spongy for a big 500 four-stroker. So as you can see, the bike's previous owner now bolted on a pair of more modern style Maxton forks, which are much tougher and of much better quality as well. And once more, the DR500 still had an old school drum brake fitted to the front, which was said to be pretty good for its day. And because this bike didn't have its standard Kayaba forks fitted onto the front, a new drum anchor plate had to be fabricated to fit the stock Suzuki brake drum to those upgraded Maxton forks. And again, at the back of this bike in 82, it would also have been a pair of Kayaba rear shocks on this DR, so it's no surprise to see that after the bike's many years on the racetrack or trail, that we now have a pair of Swedish-made Öhlins units, which were a major upgrade to those pretty awful Kayabas that Suzuki fitted to these bikes way back in the day. So as we move on to the bike's swing arm now, although at first glance this rear swing arm may look like it's an alloy unit, it is in fact a very good strong steel swing arm, which in my view is a much better choice, because although it may be heavier than an alloy unit, these steel swingers can take a lot more punishment than its soft alloy counterparts. But of course the downside to that is that it all adds to the overall weight of this bike, which in our case is over the 300-pound barrier when it's filled with fuel. So it's certainly no lightweight or big DR500. Now, some of the other smaller parts on the swing arm, like this quite well engineered chain tensioner and roller, aren't standard original parts, but this item here is another motorcycle accessory from Sammy Miller Products. And once more, we have a steel fuel tank on our Suzuki that usually held, I think it was just over 2 gallons of gas, or about 9 litres if you like, although you'd think that Suzuki would maybe have manufactured this fuel cell in alloy rather than steel, just to try and reduce the overall weight of what was already a quite heavy motorcycle. And again, I'm pretty sure that this is another aftermarket gas cap and breather pipe, and not the stock part that would have been fitted in 1982. Now, by all accounts, it's said that these Suzukis had a pretty comfortable seat, which is probably what you'd expect on a bike that could either be used on the road or on the racetrack. And as I remember, they also had a chrome grab rail that would have been fitted here just below that DR logo, just to help you lift the bike up if you inadvertently dropped it. But again, this has been removed, probably just to try and reduce the weight ever so slightly. And so as we move on to the bike's controls department, which again have all been replaced from the factory originals, but the handlebars are a pair of Pro Taper 7/8 handlebars, which are very good quality items. And again, a good addition to any off-road bike is to have an engine kill switch fitted just in case of any problems with that DR's motor and you need to shut it down in a hurry. Now, the clutch and the front brake levers on our Suzuki are these high quality ASV unbreakable items, or so they're meant to be, but I don't really know if that is actually the case, that if you drop the bike onto its side and these levers survive, but that's the theory anyhow. But again, a good quality gasser throttle, and the grips are all supplied by Scott, which I expect will all work perfectly well on this DR 4-stroke Suzuki. And once more, as we move on to the bike's plastics, and I expect that these side panels are all still the original 82 items, due to the fact that they are all made of plastic and can usually take all kinds of abuse on the track down the years, although the front and rear mudguards are almost certainly brand new replacements, which are easily obtainable for these bikes from any good reputable off-road part shop. And this rear mudguard once again is another replacement item which still looks the goods bolted onto our DR500. Although at the end of the day, despite all of those replacement and upgraded bits and pieces that are bolted onto our DR Suzuki, it's still quite a decent looking bike, and despite it not being used on the road any longer, it still makes a very good weekend race bike, and also a machine that's going to be quite reliable and a lot of fun as a second or standby machine. And when you take a look at what these DR500s were actually like in their stock factory trim, with all of the lights, mirrors, speedometer, indicators, and of course that quite heavy tailpipe, it's little wonder that these bikes tip the scales at £321. Okay, so we've had quite a good walk around the bike, so let's get Jim to try and fire it up, and let's all have a little listen to what one of these 500 Suzukis actually sound like. Well, there you have it. I do hope you enjoyed that walk around Jim Colligan's 1982 DR500 Suzuki Fourstroker. As I said, not a fully original bike from that year, but a road and trail machine that was converted to be used as a weekend motocross race bike. So coming up next here on CDB TV, we're going to look at one of those iconic machines from the 1960s, and in my next video we'll be taking a look at this 1965 250 twin port CZ machine. And these bikes of course were made famous at that time by the likes of Joel Robert, who raced these machines to many successes during the 1960s. So we'll be taking a look at this example here of Stuart Riddle's when we return with my next video posting. But until the next time, thanks again for watching CDB TV, and I hope to see you again very soon. So until then, it's bye for now.